Hey guys, just because you've been stuck at home feeling neglected for the last 9 months or so doesn't mean your car has to be. Follow along today as I do one of the most basic maintenance functions you can do at home, changing your own motor oil. Alright, so thanks for finding the channel. Here's the deal. I know you can take your car down to Walmart and have the oil changed for $19.99 in the side of COVID, alright? But not everybody wants to do that. So, today I'm going to show you how I do it right here in my own driveway, showing you from the basic kind of oil I get, to how I set the vehicle up, to how I actually do the oil change, and then what I do once I'm done. Follow along, it's pretty easy. If you have any questions, just put them down in the comments down below. I'd love to help you out. And then before I get started in the procedure here, do me a favor. Hit the subscribe button. Thanks. First things first, you always want to have a clean workspace. Okay, so here's what we're working with today. Here's my philosophy on changing your oil at home. Use some sort of good, reputable oil, right? I use my store brand. Usually that's a good oil that they just brand themselves. And here's where you make your money on the filter, okay? You get what you pay for when it comes to filters. I recommend Wix. It hasn't proved me wrong yet. All right, the guy might ask himself, what tools do I need to do an oil change? Pretty basic. You need something to catch the oil. A big pan like this. You need a funnel to pour the oil in when you're done, and you need a wrench to loosen the drain plug on the oil pan. You also need some sort of wrench to get the oil filter off the car. Each of these would work. There's all kinds of different types. I also recommend another type that is just a little cup that fits on the bottom of the oil filter, and you go on your ratchet or something and unscrew it like that. Either way, all these tools can be purchased at the same place you buy your oil and your filter. Once you get your oil and your filter, just find a good space you can work in your garage or in your driveway to do the oil change. Today we're going to be doing it on the old Red Dragon, my wife's 1996 Toyota 4Runner, and it's been about 4,500 miles since we did the last oil change. Some vehicles you can get underneath like this one, but I'm going to show you how most of us are going to have to handle it, and I'm going to jack the thing up, put it on jack stands to get underneath. Alright, if you're going to jack your vehicle up to get underneath it, make sure you set your parking brake, leave the vehicle in gear, and use jack stands. Don't get your jack stands from Harbor Freight. Just Google it if you're wondering why. Okay, and then I'm going to slide my oil catcher underneath there and my wrenches, and the next thing I'm going to do is crawl under the car and we're going to drain the oil and remove the filter. If you don't have a creeper or some fancy leftover kitchen mat like I do, you can just use a piece of carpet, but that'll save your back and it'll save you from putting your arm in the ice when you're laying underneath the car to change the oil. When you're getting ready to do the oil, go ahead and drive the car you're going to change the oil in down to the parts store to get your oil and supplies and your lunch and whatnot, because when you go to change your oil, you actually want it to be hot so that it runs out of the car quickly and it has all the contaminants and everything. It's been running from the top of the engine and it'll all run down and out into the pan. Alright, let's crawl under the car. Okay, under the car, step one is to find where the oil drains out. In this thing, my 4Runner, you can see a lot of it's covered by skid plate. But the engineers at Toyota were nice enough to put this little hole here, and what do you know? That's our drain plug right there. You can usually spot the drain plug on an older vehicle because there will be drips of oil coming off of it. And if you've been taking it down to the local Spiffy Jiffy, it'll be stripped around the sides here and look like they've been doing it with an impact gun. But there it is on the old Toyota, and it takes a 14mm socket to get on there. So I'm going to use my old dog bone wrench. Go in there, spin that guy off, and try not to let it run down my arm while I let it drop right down here into the pan. Okay. Once you get that drain plug out, you'll want to take a look at it up close here. Make sure there's no pieces of connecting rods or, stuff hanging onto it. You look at the little gasket around there, make sure it looks like it's sealing, not mangled up too bad. And then set this aside where you can find it, because we're going to have to jam that back in the hole here in a minute. Once you get your oil draining out into the pan, the next thing we got to do is change the filter. So, if you're lucky, like me on this bad boy, you can't see it. It's back there, trust me. Let's go underneath, I'll point it out. If you look back in the hole right there, there's this big tube thing. the big wire connector. Back behind it, that's my oil filter. Okay? So, again, the engineers at Toyota hooked us up, stuffed that in a spot where you can rarely access it, but check it out, they gave us an access hole. One of the reasons I like jacking this vehicle up to get in is so that my tire droops down, because I just pull this flat back right there, and look at that. There's my oil filter. If you're lucky, a guy can reach in there and just kind of crank on her. There it is. And get her to come loose. Make sure you leave your pan under the car while you do this, because it's going to run oil all over the place. Okay, loose and out. Now, the getting everything off the car and out of the car is done. We just got to reverse the process and put stuff back in. Okay, remember this little guy? Now that everything's drained out of the car, we got to go back into the hole. Get it threaded back in there. We'll screw it back into place, torque it down. You can follow your manufacturer's torque specifications to get it back in. My technique, I get it snug and then just give it a little bit more. Now, let's put the new filter on. A quick note on oil filters. If your vehicle has the oil filter oriented in such a way that you can screw it in like this without spilling anything out of it, I highly recommend you go ahead and dump oil into this. Fill it up with oil. Screw it onto the car. That way when you start the vehicle, it doesn't have to wait for the oil to fill this up and cycle before it gets to all the bearings and moving parts inside your engine. If you're like me though, and you have a Toyota 4Runner where it plugs in like this, not a good idea. I do recommend on any time you do it, I take a little bit of oil, my new oil there, and I'll just run it around on the gasket like this so that I get a good seal and it doesn't try to stick and tear when I put it on the vehicle. Okay, there gives us a good view of exactly where the oil filter goes and screws into. So I'm going to have to kind of do this blind, reach in, there we go, and screw it into place. How tight do you get it? Again, I just do this one hand tight, because as this thing warms up and comes to temperature and has a lot of hot oil run through it, it always seems like they get tighter, and they're hard to get off if you crank them down too tight to begin. There we go, filter installed. Before this next step, I go ahead and take a minute and I look under the car and think, did I put my drain plug in? Yes. Is my filter on and tight? Yes. Did it screw down all the way? Yes. Okay, that's the case. Now we're ready to put the oil in the car. So look for the cap where the oil would go into the engine. And when it comes to what type of oil I use or what viscosity, I just follow my manufacturer recommendations for the type of vehicle, type of engine, and the environmental conditions you'll be driving it in. So before I dump my clean oil through that filter, I'm going to clean it up real quick, and then we're going to pour all that oil into the engine. Okay, once you get your oil dumped in, don't throw this container away. I'll show you why in a minute. The other thing is, if you're like me, when you go to dump the oil in, those first few drops, or more than that, end up landing right on the exhaust manifold. So when you fire this thing up and you start to drive it, after you've wiped off all the oil you could and kind of let it sit there for a little bit, don't fret if it smells like oil for a little bit, burning oil, because you might have dripped some when you started pouring the oil in. Once we have all the new oil in the engine and the old oil out of the engine, you might wonder, what are we supposed to do with all this old oil and the old filter? Well, here's what I do. I let my filter drain for a while. You get all the drips out of it, and then I just drop it back in the box where my new filter came and put that guy in the trash can. We save this container because what we're going to do, especially if you buy your oil at places like O'Reilly, they do recycling, a lot of them. So we're going to put our old oil right back in this container, and the next time I head down there, I'm going to swing through there and drop off that gallon of oil with him. One more tip for you, something I do whenever I'm doing these oil changes like this is, you know, when I'm dumping it back in, I put an old piece of cardboard down because inevitably you're going to dump some. It's going to make a little bit of mess. And then when I'm done with that stuff, I use some of this brake parts cleaner. Don't recommend letting your children sniff this or do it indoors or around a flame or anything. Hit a little bit of that on the pan, a little bit of that in my funnel. And then wipe that out with my rag, and that'll have me all set up and ready to go for the next time. Before we can sign this job off as complete, we got a couple more things we're going to do. First thing, if you don't have one, throw a little notebook down in your car. Use this as a maintenance log. Otherwise, you tend to forget when the last time it was you changed the oil or rotated the tires. So that's what I'm going to do now. And then finally, the last thing we want to do before we give this up is start the engine. And if you have gauges, you'll look at the oil pressure, but if you just have lights, you'll make sure that that light goes out, indicating you have oil pressure. We'll let this thing run for a second. I'll shut it off. I'll let it rest for a minute, and then I'll go out there and I'll check the level in the engine, make sure I topped it off to the right level, and we'll call this one good. Hey, thanks for following along. I hope this helps you out. I hope this inspires you that a normal dude in his garage can go out and do something like change your oil or other simple maintenance on your vehicle. If you like what you saw, hit subscribe, leave me a comment, reach out to me, let me know what you think. Thanks, take care.